So, amidst all the trade rumors for guys like Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal, amidst the just recent trade between the Orlando Magic and the Memphis Grizzlies for Desmond Bane that included 5 total first round picks in the trade, the biggest headline, I'd say, regardless of the NBA draft that's going on, regardless of the NBA finals going on, the biggest deal yet to be made this offseason, and that is, quietly looming within the background, is the trade of Giannis Antetokounmpo finally from the Milwaukee Bucks. But the big time question is, where could Giannis end up? Is there a team that could actually give Milwaukee the right amount of value to acquire Giannis Antetokounmpo? And if so, where does he go? And are those teams really competitive in winning a championship with him? So let's go ahead and answer all of those questions right now. But before we get into the episode, I just want to say thank you guys for all of your support on the recent episodes on the podcast. I want to work your guys' eyes to down below, subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, commenting, and sharing with your friends. And of course, like always, like I'm going to say, go ahead and follow us on all social medias. All those ads are going to be in the description down below as well. We're on all those social medias. You will get to see my reactions to breaking news within the NFL and the NBA. And you will also always be notified for when the podcast uploads. And both of those things are important because we are in the midst of the NBA Finals. NBA draft is coming in just over a week's time. You have NFL training camp kicking off, NBA offseason. There's going to be so much content rolling throughout the podcast, the YouTube shorts, the other social medias, so you don't want to miss any of it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick it into high gear and get into this Giannis Antetokounmpo trade talk, which right now I am even making this episode. I really wanted to make this episode a couple of days back, a couple of weeks ago, when trade talks were really at its highest. But I waited some time to see where things are really were really going to go. And right now, the trade of Giannis Antetokounmpo over the past couple of days has become a lot more difficult to make, and that ultimately came down to the trade of Desmond Bane to the Orlando Magic. As you had a guy in Desmond Bane who I would say most people would agree is probably a borderline all-star, but is, the third best player on an NBA team, whether it's on the Grizzlies or the Magic. He is the third best player on those squads. We saw him go for a heavy amount when it came to trade value. 5 total first round picks, or 4 and 1 pick swap, and then 2 really solid role players in both Cole Anthony and Kentavious Caldwell Pope. That is an absolute load for a guy who is not even going to be your second option on your squad. And seeing as how that value has turned up, the question that I now have is, what is Milwaukee going to want for Giannis? I mean, Desmond Bane is nowhere near the talent of a Giannis Antetokounmpo, a top 3 player arguably in the world right now, former 2-time MVP and whatnot. Amazing on both sides of the ball, has been leading Milwaukee for years and years at this point, has been their big-time franchise star that they've really built things around. What is going to be the value for him? And really, as of right now, with the Desmond Bane trade really setting the bar, I think that you could realistically see Milwaukee asking for either a star player or a couple of young players and like 6, 7, maybe even 8 first round picks. And I know that might sound egregious, that might sound insane, that might seem like I'm absolutely over exaggerating, but we saw Rudy Gobert and Mikal Bridges and now Desmond Bane 3 years in a row. All of those guys go for 5 first rounders and some solid players. Could you imagine what somebody like Giannis will come across to, especially because he is still in the midst of the middle of his career? He sits right now at, I'm looking at it, 30 years old. He's still in the prime of his career. What that could really harness? Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine it. And that's the big thing when going over these trades is there a team that can go out and give you realistic value to go out and grab him? And there are a couple teams, despite it, that I have in mind that I think really could go out and make a realistic bargain for him. I have 6 teams on my list today. That's the Miami Heat, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the New Orleans Pelicans, Brooklyn Nets, Houston Rockets, and Dallas Mavericks. Now, those are not ranked in any particular order. And of course, there are other teams that are more wild cards than other teams on this list. For example, the Pelicans are my big time wild card team in this, and you're going to see what kind of package that I have in store for that. But these are the teams that I believe right now have enough player or pick value to be able to go out and trade for Giannis. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and get into the deals that I have. And we start over in Miami. The Miami Heat would trade over Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and Jaime Jaquez. Those are the three players that would match the salary of Giannis Antetokounmpo, and 5 first-round picks, including the number 20 overall from this year's first round, which with the little bit of depth that this year's draft class has, that number 20 overall pick could have some real value. Now, looking at this from Milwaukee's side of view, you do start to see, how this could potentially benefit them. You get a big time offensive engine in Tyler Hero. You get Duncan Robinson, who can play that 3-and-D role, and you get your potential future small forward in Jaime Jaquez Jr. Now, of course, Jaime is not going to replace Giannis Antetokounmpo and get anywhere near the level that Giannis was at, but he could still play and be a big time scoring role for you there. And even at number 20, you could go in a bunch of different directions with that pick. You get a point guard like Igor Demon or Nolan Traore to run the pick and roll with guys like Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ward. You could get maybe like a stretch four in Rasheer Fleming or a Carter Bryant, right? You could get a big time athlete, but somebody who's still really raw, and Noah Asenge out of France. You could really work your way around that. And the Heat, they would definitely be much improved. You would have Davion Mitchell, right? You'd have Giannis, you'd have Khalil Ware, you'd have Bam Adebayo. But would they really be a top heavy team in the East? I definitely don't think so, which makes these picks, especially in these future drafts, makes those picks a lot more valuable for Milwaukee, because that's the thing that you have to really consider when going through these acquisitions is trading your star player over to the opposing team. That is going to lower the trade value of all of these picks. But trading Giannis to a team like the Heat that is nowhere near complete right now, that has, some okay depth maybe off of the bench with guys like Nikola Jovic, but that team would definitely put the Heat around maybe like a 5, 6, 7 seed around then, and potentially in the later years when you start to lose value, when maybe you have to get rid of somebody like a Bam Adebayo, those picks could end up getting worse and worse and worse. So I think that could actually be a pretty beneficial trade for Milwaukee. Then you go from Miami all the way to the Midwest with the Oklahoma City Thunder. They have probably the most enticing amount of trade value because they have just so many draft picks in their arsenal. So the trade for this would be Isaiah Hartenstein, Isaiah Joe, and Nikola Topic. Those are the 3 players that would match the salary. And I do like Nikola Topic because he is virtually coming into the season as a rookie because he was hurt for part of the season. He didn't really get to play. So he's coming in as a rookie point guard that you could really build your team around in Milwaukee, especially if you decide to also trade away Damian Lillard that can harness some value. You would get Milwaukee's 2 first-round picks from this year, being number 15 and number 24. Again, that could be Rasheer Fleming, right? That could potentially be Nick Clifford. That could be Austin Newell. Number 24, that could be guys like Cam Jones, maybe Jace Richardson and whatnot, but that type of value. And then 3 other first-round picks, all 3 being in 2026, one being from the Utah Jazz, which could look to be pretty beneficial, and then the other one from the Philadelphia 76ers, which if they probably implode another year, especially with the number 3 overall draft pick in their hands and with young value with Jared McCain and Tyrese Maxey, they could look to rebuild within the next year, train away Paul George, maybe even train away Joel Embiid. There's been rumors of that off and on over the past couple of years, and so that suddenly becomes more valuable picks as well. But for Milwaukee, I mean, this definitely gives you probably the most value that you're going to get. Isaiah Hartenstein is just a two-way hustler. He's a physical beast down low on the block who just makes it so annoying for opposing teams. You have Isaiah Joe, who despite being 26 years old, is still seemingly pretty young and was the best three-point shooter this year for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And then, like I said, you have a future, European point guard beast in Nikola Topic, who sits at 6'6". And then you could build in some wings and stuff with those draft picks that you have. So it would really, fill in a full 360 for your squad. As for the Thunder, I mean, the sky would be the limit if they could go out and get a Giannis Antetokounmpo. This would be them cashing in on all of these draft picks that they've gotten, and you'd have a lineup of Shea, Lou Dort, Giannis, right? You'd have J-Dub, you'd have Chet Holmgren still. That lineup alone, with just the length that you get out of that lineup, would be absolutely insane. And then your bench is still, completely functional. You still have Caruso, you still have Casey Wallace, you still have Aaron Wiggins, you still have Kendrick Williams. They still have a 9-man lineup despite trading 3 players, 2 of which are very, very vital to their rotation. They still have a 9-man rotation that is really solid. And you add in a big time scoring beast like Giannis, who could work on the block, who could go from the outside and drive and kick to those amazing 3-point shooters that you have. OKC would be one of the most dominant teams likely that we've ever seen with Giannis Antetokounmpo in their lineup. It would just be insane. Then you move over back to the East for a trade with the Brooklyn Nets, possibly, who have the most value right now. That's the interesting thing about Brooklyn is they can offer as much as possible right now, which is it makes the trade with Milwaukee a lot more certain, right? Because in the 2 trades past, we've had teams that you don't know if those first round picks, if that value is going to be elevated by Giannis, if it's going to be lowered because of their team construction. Brooklyn has all 4 of their first round picks that they're going to offer up in this year's draft, which I think is really important. So the trade would be Nicholas Claxton and Cam Johnson. That would match, the value that they need. And then all 4 of their first round picks from this year, which would be number 8, number 19, number 26, and number 27. Now, obviously, picks like 26 and 27, do they hold a ton of value? No. But I do think that you have a lot of depth in this draft where you could go out and get some solid 3-and-D wings to go ahead and surround, especially somebody like a Giannis Antetokounmpo, who will be at the head of the squad. Not to mention, you have you have Nick Claxton going to the Milwaukee Bucks with his type of rim protection. You have the length of Cam Johnson next to him. You still have Damian Lillard there. And then you could go out with that number 8 pick. You could get anyone, right? You could go out and maybe get like a Kaspar's Jack Junis, maybe a future point guard there. You could go out and get maybe potentially like a Derek Queen, right? You could get Colin Murray Boyles. You could get an Austin Newell potentially. I already mentioned Derek Queen. Kaman Maluwak. Maybe, who knows? But maybe a Con Knoble or even like a Trey Johnson man just to fall to 8. And then with 19, 27, 26, again, you could go out and get some really, really solid 3-and-D guys. I'm talking about the Jace Richardsons of the world. I'm talking about the Will Rileys, the Adu Thieros, those guys that just play their role perfectly. And surrounding those guys around guys like Nick Claxton and Cam Johnson could give you some solid work across the board. The problem for the Nets is now they wouldn't really have a lot to build around Giannis. It would pretty much just give them Giannis Antetokounmpo and add them to their current roster. But obviously they would lose. They basically would be replacing Nick Claxton with Giannis Antetokounmpo, which, if you ask me, is solid, right? But then who else do you really have to build around him? You do have D'Angelo Russell, but outside of that, guys like Noah Clowney, Cam Thomas. It would make Brooklyn better, especially right now, but it wouldn't give them a complete lineup. It wouldn't be like Oklahoma City where they could go out and they still hold a 7, 8, 9-man type of roster rotation that they could put out. Brooklyn would pretty much be relegated to like a 5, 6-man talented rotation out there. And they would still need to go out and develop guys like Noah Clowney to be able to up their style of play. But it is interesting for Milwaukee just to get the right amount of value right now for Giannis. Then you go to the 4th trade of the day, which is with the Dallas Mavericks. This would give Milwaukee the most amount of players. So we've had like the most amount of value right now. We've had like probably the best value of draft picks. We've had the best, players that you could be given. But now you have the most amount of players that you could grab right now. So the trade would be Klay Thompson, Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington, and Najee Marshall. Those would be all 4 guys that would finally be able to match the cap of Giannis Antetokounmpo. And then you would just get 2 first-round picks. But obviously one of those first-round picks would be the number 1 overall pick this year, which would get you Cooper Flagg. And honestly, Damian Lillard, Klay Thompson, Cooper Flagg, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford with Najee Marshall, Pat Connaughton, if you're able to keep Brook Lopez on board and Bobby Portis, that could be a team that potentially competes for a playoff spot right then and there. You know what I'm saying? Like, that is a solid lineup across the board, especially if you're allowing Cooper Flagg to get a majority of those touches and just be able to develop him overall. And then you have your 3-and-Ds like PJ and Najee. You have a big-time rim protector who I think will be a big-time upgrade over Brook Lopez and Daniel Gafford. And Klay, despite him being old, can still work in as being that off-screen shooter. The thing that sucks for Dallas would be obviously you'd be losing a ton of depth on that side. You'd have Kyrie, you'd have Giannis, Anthony Davis, and Derek Lively in that front court, which would be absolutely disgusting. But then, kind of off the bench, you would just have guys like Dante Exum, Spencer Dinwiddie, right? You would have a lot less depth coming off the bench. But I mean, that's starting five with Kyrie, AD, Giannis, and Derek Lively. That would be absolutely disgusting. Would it make them better? Who knows? Because we have seen depth become much more important over the past couple of seasons. But regular season wise, I think that they could definitely go out and dominate if that squad can stay healthy. Of course, there's the concerns of Kyrie and Anthony Davis staying healthy, but the length, the defensive capabilities there would just be insane. And I would not put it past Nico Harrison to go out and make a deal like this because we did see him trade away Luka Doncic, obviously. So trade away Cooper Flag for Giannis and all of these players definitely would not put it past him. Is it the smartest deal for Dallas? Probably not, but that would be an insane team. You can't even lie. Then you move to the Houston Rockets. We're staying within Texas with the Houston Rockets. Their deal would basically give Milwaukee the best future player outside of like a Cooper Flag, obviously. The best young player that's in the NBA right now, and that would be a Men Thompson. That would be the value that I would see coming from Houston because that's the player that I think that Milwaukee would really want. You get your replacement at that small forward position, and you get a true point forward in a Men Thompson who, if he improves his 3-point shot, could be an all-around nasty player. Now, the thing that sucks for Milwaukee is that they would have to take on Fred VanVleet's contract. That's really the only way that Houston can get anything done trade-wise, unless they want to package like 4 or 5 players, and still your top player would be like a Jalen Green or a Dylan Brooks or whatnot. They would have to take on VanVleet's contract, but they get VanVleet, they'd get Amen Thompson, they get the number 10 overall pick from this year, they'd get a 2027 pick, first-round pick, which is also from Phoenix, which that could potentially, within the next 2 years, if they are deciding to rebuild around Booker and trade away Kevin Durant and trade away Bradley Beal, that could be another top 10 pick. And then you get their 2028 first round pick. For Houston, this would be solid. It would kind of leave them with a little bit of a hole at the point guard position, but you'd have Jalen Green, you'd have Giannis, you'd have Sengun, you would have Tari Eason and company, you'd have, Dylan Brooks. You would have a lot of depth at that forward position for sure. Your defense would get a lot better, but your shooting would definitely get a lot worse with VanVleet gone. And that's really the biggest hole in their game right now. So I don't know actually how much Giannis would improve them. I would actually really like more of a Kevin Durant type player to go to Houston than Giannis because the shooting is just such a huge hole. For Milwaukee, I mean, VanVleet would obviously suck to take on, but that now you could kind of just clear the board and build around a Men Thompson. Like, go out and get some solid shooters. Maybe you could get like a Concanopal at number 10, or maybe you could get like a Derek Queen and just have two incredible shot creators from the perimeter to go out and drive to the basket, maybe play in the pick and roll a little bit. Maybe you could get a Kaman Maluwak to potentially play defense down low. Maybe a Jeremiah Fears goes and you could trade away, Damian Lillard and then have Fears grow behind VanVleet. There's a lot of different directions that you could go with that number 10 overall pick. And with Thompson's potential, the sky would be the absolute limit. And I think that overall, Thompson is the best player right now that you would be able to get for Giannis Antetokounmpo. And then finally, the final trade on the board is definitely 100% a wild card type trade. I was trying to think of a team that would be absolutely out of nowhere for the Bucks to trade Giannis to, and that would be the New Orleans Pelicans. And again, these are just mock trades. I definitely think that New Orleans would probably have to give up a lot more for Giannis, especially with just how much uncertainty there is right here. But for the trade that I have Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy III, and then 4 for future first-round picks, including Milwaukee would get their pick back in 2027, and then the 2025 pick would obviously be New Orleans number 7 overall, which again has a ton of value. The reason why I think the New Orleans would have to give up a lot more value, though, is because we don't know what the status of Zion Williamson really is. He's either injured or there's now some off the court issues and whatnot. So we'd really have to see how available he is going to be. If he's not available, then obviously New Orleans would have to take him out, and they would likely have to put in like Herb Jones and then like CJ McCollum to complete all of the salary and to give you enough value right there. But you get your future small forward of the future. You're hoping that Zion Williamson can be the player that he is every single time that he's on the court, and that he can continue to play on the court. And having those two with their length, with their defense capabilities, with their rim protection down below, that would be amazing. And then you go out and get like a Jeremiah Fears at number 7. Maybe, who knows? Maybe Ace Bailey falls to you at number 7. Maybe you can go out and get a Derek Queen. You get a Casper Jack Jr., and then you still have DeJounte Murray on that side for New Orleans to pair with Giannis and Yves Misi. Like, that could be solid for both teams if Zion Williamson was 100% a certain thing. So, again, for Milwaukee, this is definitely the least value that they're going to get. This is the lowest floor value, but it definitely has a high peak ceiling, especially if Zion can work out and then you move in Trey Murphy. You still have Damian Lillard on that side, and then you could go out and get an impactful shooting guard, maybe even a Conchanople and whatnot. That could be a dangerous team. And then for New Orleans, this really gives you a little bit more of a reset. You'd still have Herb Jones, which would be nice. You still have some defensive capabilities alongside Giannis, Yves Misi. You have DeJounte Murray still there, Jose Alvarado to come off the bench. So, they'd still need a couple more pieces, and a lot of these teams would still need a couple more pieces, especially with how much of value that they're really going to give up. But it's Giannis, man, and Giannis's talent cannot be denied, even with some of the value that you're giving up on this. But that's really all that I had today. Those are all the 6 trades that I could really work out and that I could find. What is the most realistic to likely happen? I'd probably have to say probably the Thunder. As much as it hurts me to say it, I think that OKC just gives you the best value possible. And you're going to have picks in the future that are going to be solid as well. You're going to get Hartenstein. You're going to get Isaiah Joe. You're going to get Nikola Topic. Behind that, maybe the Dallas Mavericks, just because there is that prospect of getting Cooper Flag. And I think that Nico Harrison will pull the trigger on that deal. Then behind that, maybe it's like a Houston and then Miami and then Brooklyn and then the Pelicans. But overall, I mean, none of those deals are perfect, right? And I think that certain deals would need to be worked out to get them more value, but all of those teams would be so much fun and a lot of talent, and I would just love to see that happen. So let me know what you guys think down below. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What did you guys like about the trades? What did you guys not like? Who is maybe another team that you guys could think of that could potentially go out and grab Giannis? Where do you think that Giannis would be most impactful, where he would be able to win? Do you think a Giannis trade is actually realistic this year, especially with the recent trade of Desmond Bane? I want all of those questions to be answered down below, along with you guys subscribing, leaving more comments, liking the video, and sharing with your friends. And, of course, like always, following all those social medias. All of those ads are down below in the description. I hope that you guys are having a fantastic week. Thank you guys again for all of your support on the episodes. And without further ado, that's all I have for you guys today. I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.